There are two men I want you to think about. The first one is a doctor. He graduated at the top of his class. He earns $300,000 a year. He drives a Porsche, lives in a 5-bedroom house in the suburbs, and by every visible measure, he has made it. He filed for bankruptcy at 52. The second man is a janitor. He worked the same building for 38 years. He never earned more than $24,000 in a single year. He clipped coupons. He drove a used Honda Civic until it broke down, then bought another used Honda Civic. When he died, he left $8 million to a local hospital and a library. Same country, same economy, same financial system. Completely different outcomes. So what separated them? It wasn't intelligence. It wasn't income. It wasn't even luck. It was psychology. And today, we're going to go deep into the hidden psychology of wealth, the invisible mental traps that destroy financial potential, and the quiet principles that build it silently over decades. Morgan Housel spent years studying the behavior of investors, economists, and everyday people around money. What he found wasn't what most finance books tell you. He found that wealth has almost nothing to do with spreadsheets. It has everything to do with behavior. He wrote, "The way you behave with money is more important than what you know about money." And he's right. You can know every financial metric, every investment term, every market theory, and still be broke. Because knowledge doesn't stop you from making emotional decisions. And emotional decisions are where wealth goes to die. There are 5 psychological traps that quietly destroy financial futures. 5 invisible forces that operate beneath awareness, shaping every decision, every purchase, every risk. Let's go through all 5. Here's a question that sounds simple, but almost nobody can answer correctly. How much is enough? Most people don't have an answer, not because they haven't thought about it, but because our minds are built to keep raising the number. You hit $100,000 in savings, and immediately the target moves to $500,000. You hit $500,000, and now $1 million feels like the real finish line. You hit the $1 million, and suddenly you're comparing yourself to someone with 10. This is what Howell calls the moving goalpost, and it's not a character flaw, it's human wiring. We evolved in environments where more always meant safer, more food, more shelter, more resources. The brain hasn't caught up to modern finance. It still treats every financial milestone as a temporary state, not a destination. The trap isn't wanting more. The trap is not knowing when enough becomes dangerous. Rajat Gupta was a Goldman Sachs board member. He was worth hundreds of millions, but he wanted more. He started leaking insider information for additional income he didn't need. He ended up in federal prison. The goalpost didn't move him forward, it moved him backward into a cell. Howell's answer to greed is radical in its simplicity. Define enough before you start. Write it down. Make it concrete. Because a target that doesn't exist can never be hit, and a race with no finish line is a race you're designed to lose. Here's something most people don't consciously realize about their financial decisions. They're not actually trying to build wealth. They're trying to look wealthy. There's a difference, a significant one. When someone buys a $90,000 car, they believe others will see them and think that person is successful. What actually happens is that the observer thinks, I wish I had that car. Nobody's thinking about the driver. They're thinking about themselves. Housel puts it directly. Spending money to show people how much money you have is the fastest way to have less money. This is the trap of envy, and it works in 2 directions. We spend to keep up with people we admire, and we drain our resources chasing the appearance of wealth, while the actual wealthy are doing the opposite. Most genuinely wealthy people look ordinary. They live in modest houses, they drive average cars, they don't post their net worth on Instagram, because they understand something the envy trap prevents us from seeing. Wealth is what you don't spend. It's the money that stays invisible, compounding quietly in accounts nobody knows about. The flashy lifestyle isn't a sign of wealth. In many cases, it's the evidence that wealth never fully arrived. The cure for envy isn't gratitude exactly, it's clarity. Clarity about what you're actually measuring yourself against. Because if you're comparing your financial state to someone else's visible lifestyle, you are comparing your reality to a performance, and you will always lose a competition you were never meant to enter. This one is counterintuitive, because fear of losing money feels responsible. It feels cautious. It feels like wisdom. It's often the most expensive mistake people make. When markets fall, most people sell. When uncertainty rises, most people freeze. When inflation climbs, most people move into cash and wait for clarity that never fully comes. Housel calls this tail risk aversion, the irrational fear of the catastrophic outcome that causes people to sacrifice long-term growth for short-term safety. And the data is brutal on this. From 1928 to today, the U.S. stock market has survived 2 world wars, multiple financial crises, pandemics, political chaos, and complete economic uncertainty. It has gone up over time, every single time. But the average retail investor dramatically underperforms the market, not because they picked the wrong stocks, because they got scared and moved at the wrong moments. Fear doesn't just lose you money in the moment, it compounds your loss forward. Every year you sit in cash waiting for the right time is a year of compounding you never get back. Here's what Housel wants you to understand. The solution isn't fearlessness. It's building a financial strategy that you can actually stay in when fear arrives, because fear will arrive. The question is whether your plan accounts for your own psychology or pretends it doesn't exist. The investor who earns 9% annually and never panics will always outperform the investor who earns 12% but bails at the first downturn. Behavior beats knowledge every time. Of all the concepts in personal finance, compounding is the most powerful and the most misunderstood. Not because it's complicated, because it's boring. Warren Buffett is the most famous case study in compounding history. His net worth is approximately $100 billion. What most people don't know? Over 96% of that wealth was accumulated after his 65th birthday. He started investing at 10. He had a good track record for decades, but the exponential growth, the billions, came from time, not from genius, not from insider knowledge, from letting the math run long enough to become irrational. Here's the psychology problem. The human brain is built for linear thinking. We understand addition. We feel comfortable with predictable progress. But compounding is geometric. It starts invisible, then accelerates beyond what our intuition can process. The first decade of saving feels pointless. You're putting in money and watching small numbers grow into slightly less small numbers. The brain interprets this as failure, or at least as underwhelming. So people stop. They redirect the money, they cash out, they say it's not working. They walk away from a forest fire when the first spark has just caught. The janitor from our opening story, Ronald Reed, a real person, understood this intuitively. He never made much money, but he started early, stayed consistent, never panicked, and let the compounding do what compounding does. He didn't need a finance degree. He needed patience. Patience most people can't manufacture because the reward is too far away and the present feels too immediate.
Time is the rarest financial resource and the one most often squandered by the belief that there's still time to start later.
This may be the most psychologically uncomfortable section of this video, because it challenges something we all want to believe about ourselves. Housel makes a stark distinction between skill and luck in financial success, and he is not gentle about how much luck matters. Bill Gates attended one of the only high schools in the world in the late 1960s that had a computer terminal. The odds of that were extraordinary. He has acknowledged this himself. His talent was real, his work ethic was real, but the access, the specific, unlikely access, was luck. The problem with success stories is that they're told by survivors. The businesses that failed with identical strategies, identical risk tolerance, identical intelligence, they don't write bestsellers. They disappear from the narrative. This creates a deep cognitive distortion. We see success and attribute it entirely to behavior. We see failure and look for the character flaw. We construct stories that make outcomes feel inevitable, when in reality, they existed on a spectrum of probability. This doesn't mean effort is meaningless. It means outcomes are not purely the product of effort. Why does this matter financially? Because when we erase luck from our own success stories, we start believing our methods are infallible. We take on more risk. We stop building the safety margins that bad luck will eventually require. Housel's advice here is structural. Build a financial life that can survive bad luck. Emergency funds aren't for the expected. They're insurance against the variable you can't control. Diversification isn't for the cowardly. It's acknowledgement that no one has a perfect map of the future. Humility about luck isn't weakness. It's the most rational response to a world that doesn't distribute outcomes purely on merit. So let's bring these 5 traps together, because they don't operate independently. They form a system. Greed keeps you chasing a number you'll never reach. Envy keeps you spending money to look like you've already arrived. Fear keeps you frozen when movement is what survival requires. Compounding punishes you for leaving early. And the illusion of control, the erasure of luck from your story, makes you reckless at precisely the moment the universe doesn't care about your confidence. Together, these 5 forces create the most common financial arc of our time. High earners with low net worth. People who made real money and spent it proving they made real money. People who saved diligently but panicked in 2008 and locked in a loss they never had to take. People who worked hard and achieved genuinely impressive things but built no floor for when fortune reversed. Housel's prescription is less about tactics and more about architecture. Build a financial life that doesn't require you to be a different person than you are. One that accounts for fear, greed, envy, and luck. Because pretending these forces don't apply to you is itself a form of psychological blindness. Save more than you think you need. Define enough. Stop comparing your internal balance sheet to other people's external signaling. Start earlier than feels necessary, and stay in longer than feels comfortable. These aren't revolutionary ideas, but the psychology of wealth was never about revolutionary ideas. It was always about consistent behavior under pressure. Now, here's something I want you to consider, because we're living in a moment that changes this entire conversation. Everything we've talked about, greed, envy, fear, impatience, overconfidence, these are all products of one thing: human emotion applied to long-term problems. And for the first time in history, there is a tool that doesn't have those emotions. AI-driven financial tools are beginning to do something that was previously impossible. They remove the human variable from the execution layer of wealth building. Automated investing platforms powered by machine learning don't panic when markets fall. They don't check social media and decide to delay investing because of a headline. They don't compare their portfolio to a neighbor's and make an impulsive reallocation. They execute the strategy consistently, emotionlessly, at scale.
AI-driven budgeting tools now analyze spending patterns in real time, flagging when behavior deviates from stated financial goals. Not to shame you, but to introduce a delay between the emotional impulse and the financial action. That delay is where rational decisions are born. AI market analysis tools process volumes of data no human analyst can synthesize in real time, identifying patterns, stress-testing portfolios against historical volatility, and recalibrating risk exposure without the cognitive bias that tells a human investor his current portfolio feels right. This doesn't mean AI replaces human judgment entirely. Defining your values, setting your goals, deciding what enough means, those are human questions. But the execution, the consistency, the emotional discipline that most people cannot maintain under market pressure, that's exactly what artificial intelligence was built for. Morgan Housel wrote that the most important financial skill is getting the goalpost to stop moving. AI is the first tool in history that genuinely doesn't care about the goalpost. It doesn't feel envy. It doesn't experience fear. It doesn't need to feel smart or validated or ahead of the market. It just executes. We are entering an era where the psychological traps Housel identified, the ones that have sabotaged investors for generations, can be systematically bypassed, not by becoming less human, but by being honest about our humanity and building systems that compensate for it. The janitor and the doctor from our opening story operated in a world without those tools. You don't. The hidden psychology of wealth was never about knowing more. It was about behaving better, consistently, for longer than feels reasonable. Now you know the traps. Now the tools exist to help you stay out of them. The question is whether you'll use them or spend the next 10 years proving you didn't need to.